Okay, so ladies, gentlemen, fellow Bat family out there, welcome to a brand new episode of the Batman discussion series for part 2. And I'm always wary about this because right now we're obviously waiting for Matt Reeves to kind of, give us any ounce of update. It could be small, it could be big, but I feel like given that he said that he was looking forward to share more with us in the weeks and months to come, and we've now entered the months territory, I can't hold off anymore. We were waiting for Halloween. I put out another Batman video, kind of Penguin Season 2 video at the same time, which you should absolutely check out if you haven't done so already, but I've been holding off the discussion series for too long. So if you're brand new here, what we do is we have a good old chinwag about the Batman Part 2, basing off, stuff out there, whether it be kind of newsy, maybe not so newsy, things that could happen in Part 2, theories, ideas, you name it. So if that's a bit of you, consider subscribing to the channel because, my God, when we actually get some more tangible stuff for the Batman Part 2 in the coming months, I'm going to be all over it. But starting off here with Miguel ZP5UN saying, do you think we are actually getting a third film at this point? Because I can totally see the second movie being it for Reeves. That way, DC focuses on the DCU Batman. So this is something we have kind of spoken about across the years, even since the Batman Part 1. And that is because, I think, was it Matt Reeves had this interview all the way, cast your mind back to 2017, and he said he had this arc in mind for a trilogy of movies. So I've always said when Part 1 was in production, even pre-production, this is intended to be a trilogy, but just because you intend and have like a rough roadmap of where you would take Bruce Wayne, it doesn't mean you're gonna get to fulfill that. You take it as, it comes, based on the success of the box office, and that's kind of what I wanted to get into here. Like, there's a couple of different avenues you want to consider. Yes, the DCU being maybe option 2, but number 1 avenue is you can't guarantee a sequel if your first movie or even second movie doesn't do well, right? That's the most simplest one to understand. That's why Matt Reeves, despite saying a long time ago that he's got a roadmap, he would love to do a trilogy. If Part 1 only made Black Adam money at the box office, would it have got Part 2? It was never guaranteed. Now, when we get Part 2, are we guaranteed to get a Part 3? Not exactly. But this is where you want to chuck in, oh yeah, but the thing is, from everything we've learned from James Gunn so far, it does seem to be true that the DCU Batman is being held off while we get the Batman 2, out there. And even Andy Muschietti, in an interview a long while ago, said that, DC Studios, Warner Brothers has this strategy. They're doing the Batman 2 first, and then, we're going full send into the DCU Batman. So he would have heard that through, the grapevine, or, more directly than the grapevine, from people literally handling this stuff. And that makes sense, because what I keep saying recently as well is I do think that we would have had the DCU Batman sooner, and I think James Gunn thought that, because I really want to remind everyone, we were meant to have the Batman Part 2 out by now, but then it got delayed, and then it got delayed another year to now October 2027. When Gods and Monsters was first announced, obviously when you think that the Batman Part 2 would have been out by now, well yeah, you would have also have thought that the DC Batman movie would have been out sooner than what you originally projected. That is where I kind of want to reel it in here and not worry about it so much. I think it's absolutely up in the air as to whether we get a Part 3, however, between Part 2 and Part 3, you can do the DCU Batman movie. Don't forget, Part 2 releases 2027. You can put the DCU Batman movie into production or pre-production, during, even at some point towards the end of next year or during 2027, right? Just hypothetically here. To release it sometime 2028, right? And then, God, by the time, let's just hypothetically assume here that we are getting a Part 3, Part 3 wouldn't be out for ages. Now, sure, we wouldn't necessarily be dealing with a writer's strike or anything like that, which did cause some issues for Matt Reeves, as well as a lot of personal things in Matt Reeves' life, as he has now publicly said himself. But, I think it's safe to say we wouldn't have the Batman Part 2. I think it would be a miracle to see it just 2 years after Part 2 releases in October 2027, so 2029. That would be a miracle, right? So I think, let's just roughly say, for example's sake here, 2030. Well, you can kind of see where I'm going with it. Like, there's no reason why DC Studios wouldn't still really focus on DCU Batman and try and get that out by 2028. And then you still have, like, part 3, this Elseworlds Batman tale, coming out a couple of years after that, like 2030, maybe even 2031. Like, who are we kidding here? Like, again, part 2 has taken a long time. So I guess what I'm trying to say here is, yes, you can have the DCU Batman and Matt Reeves' Elseworld Batman coexist in movie releases. There are some caveats here. You wouldn't release them, as we know, in the same calendar year, but that's not an issue. Part 2 is coming out 2027 October, and the DCU Batman can come out in between that. So are we getting a third film at this point? It was never guaranteed in the first place. Long story short here, never guaranteed. Hopefully we will. Wouldn't count on it, but, with DC Studios, and again, whoever takes over DC Studios, I still think they will maintain the production of Elseworlds movies because it would be silly not to. You look at projects like the Batman, very successful. You look at how that spun off into the Penguin and Emmy Award-winning series. You look at how we had Todd Phillips' Joker for a small budget, and that was $1 billion+ movie. Do you see what I mean? So I'm apprehensively optimistic here, but I would have said that going into part 2. Now, off the back of this, kind of adjacent in a way, I replied to this comment, but I wanted to bring it up because I know a lot of people are, oh my god! We had Shadowbat PL here saying, Boba, why are they already working on Dynamic Duo or DC Crime, Jimmy Olsen series, when we can't be sure if we're getting the Batman Part 2? Because if Paramount buys Warner Brothers, they will cancel the movie because of political themes that Part 2 will likely have. I wouldn't get hyped for the Batman Part 2 or even any upcoming DC projects till Christmas, when Warner will announce whether they are staying independent or selling to Universal or Paramount. Long story short here, guys, I really wouldn't panic about this. Again, I'm not an oracle, but when I try and approach this subject as rationally as I can, it still goes back to how whoever acquires Warner Brothers wouldn't shoot themselves in the foot. They would want to cultivate the IP that they've inherited, and they would still want to explore it. Now, up until a certain point, going into 2028 maybe, where we would have had quite a few more projects released, such as Supergirl, Clayface, Lanterns on the HBO side, The Batman Part 2, Man of Tomorrow. Both DC Studios' Elseworlds and DC mainline canon might be reevaluated. But until then, you don't basically... if you're buying something, you wouldn't just kind of like tear it up. I know some people want to argue against that, being like, well, new company, new ego. But like, it would just be too detrimental to the brand you've just inherited to basically try and do it even better your own way right away. So for that reason, I'm very confident that whether it be Paramount, whether it be whoever, they will still keep the Batman 2 going. They would absolutely want to cultivate on the epic crime saga's success from the Batman Part 1, a $770-something million movie, the Penguin, which literally won Emmys, and you're telling me okay, someone's gonna come in and just be like, tear it up. Don't get me wrong, we don't want Warner Brothers to sell. That's not good for Hollywood in general, but when we're talking about part 2 or projects to, for the foreseeable future, it's going to be okay. And also deals like this, they don't happen like that. Also, Man of Tomorrow, Batman Part 2 are entering literal production, as in actors on set shooting come April, May. Whoever buys Warner Brothers would not have fully achieved this merge status by then whatsoever. So unless they do a Batgirl and absolutely can the movie come 2027 at some point, where they're into the thick of post-production for both movies, which would, again, be dumbfounding. But, so dumbfounding, I just don't believe that would happen. It will be okay. It will be okay. It will be okay. Up next from AK Channel TV 4084, I am sure you've heard about the latest comments from the creators of Dynamic Duo and how Matt Reeves wanted to tell a Robin-centric story. Do you think this means that Robin is out of the question for part 2? We had the creators of Dynamic Duo come out in an interview say that they were originally doing this Catwoman movie like when she was a kid. And do you remember when the axe of Zaslav came down and he canceled like 42 projects, including Batgirl and stuff like that? This was one of them. And we would have maybe never have heard about it if it weren't for this interview. But then Matt Reeves stepped in essentially and literally pitched to Zaslav, dynamic duo and everything. And that's how the silver lining of that cancellation came something else, thanks to Matt Reeves. But the way this was explained kind of made it seem like, okay, if Matt Reeves was ever to do Robin, it would be in this way and not really in the medium of, you know, the live action Batman epic crime saga side of things. So just to read that out very briefly here, Matt had always wanted to make a story about Robin, and he thought this would be the medium to do it in. So one takeaway of that is indeed like, okay, so if he's always wanted to make a story about Robin, it's like, well, why not do it in part 2, like Dark Victory style? Going in, maybe save, like tease Dick Grayson part 2 and do full-on Dark Victory in part 3 or something. But no, I mean, if you always wanted to do a Robin story, oh wait, and he thought this would be the medium to do it in? A fun, family-friendly kind of sway box movie version of it? Because it's like, Matt, you could do it, you're doing your own live-action trilogy right now. You're on part 2. So that does tell me, if we are to take this quite literally, that Matt Reeves probably wouldn't explore Robert Pattinson's Batman under that kind of lens that he's doing this world, where he said himself that they're not as fantastical as the comics. Under the umbrella of fantastical comes so many things that aren't necessarily grounded in reality, such as metahuman aspects to Rogues Gallery characters, but also the idea of taking on a minor and putting him out on the street with you against thugs who have weapons like knives and guns, and expecting, you know, if we go comic book accurate age here of Dick Grayson or whoever else, let's just say comic book average wise of 12 years old. I've said this so many times, and I know we all kind of disagree or agree to disagree on this, but Matt Reeves' lens, and if you've heard him talk about this, that falls under the fantastical lens of where you would need to suspend your disbelief. So in the DCU, I would suspend my disbelief there because inherently this is a universe that is so not grounded in reality whatsoever. It's dealing with all kinds of fantastical elements like a flying Superman, metahumans, this, that, and the other, that if you try, you know, if I watch Kick-Ass with Hit Girl, as I always refer to, it's like, well, yeah, like, you know, you're suspending your disbelief here. It's like you're enjoying the movie in that sense. But Matt Reeves's and Christopher Nolan's vibe, they wouldn't get a 12-year-old put in harm's way. And yes, I know there's an interesting psychological lens there that can be explored, because I see you guys say, oh no, but Boba, I think Matt Reeves could do that with a young Robin, 12, 13 years old. I get what you're saying, but I just don't think he would agree. I really don't. I don't think Matt Reeves would agree, which is why you have a quote like this saying, Matt had always wanted to make a story about Robin, and he thought this would be the medium to do it in. A movie that's about Robins, that's family friendly, that is exploring all of these amazingly artistically creative ways to depict and construct and shoot a movie through puppetry, animation, motion capture, all of these things that Swaybox excel in. That is like Matt Reeves all over in my mind. It's like, okay, if there's a way to do it, let's do it this way. A family-friendly kind of Robin movie dynamic duo. But am I going to do it in my world? Nah, I don't know about that. Now, I will hold my hands up if I'm wrong. This doesn't even mean that I wouldn't want to see Matt Reeves explore a way to do Robin, as I often go over. I would actually be obsessed with how he would do it. But if he were to do it, I think he would do the kind of thing of okay, if he really wants to walk the line of trying to not go super old Robin, mid-20s Dick Grayson kind of thing, right? But obviously not a 12-year-old or something like that. Maybe you could have that thing which has been explored by a lot of people already. I like the idea of you could have somebody who's 17 going on to be 18, so still not an adult and everything like that, but they're putting themselves in harm's way. And if that relationship between Bruce and Dick Grayson is explored where, Bruce doesn't like the idea of doing this, but if he doesn't take him on and help train him in combat and self-defense, he might just feel kind of guilty that this kid's gonna go out there and get himself killed, whether he's stabbed or shot or something worse on the streets of Gotham. Maybe this way he kind of sees himself in Dick Grayson here, and he kind of sees how he was trained with, like, remember how Alfred was like, I didn't know what to do, I taught you how to fight, you know? So I don't know, like, that's not a fully fleshed out thing. We would be here for 2 hours otherwise if we really wanted to get into the meat of all of that. But that's like one way I think Matt Reeves would find it psychologically interesting to be like, okay, well, let's not have him as like a 20-something-year-old. Let's have him on the press of being like 18. It's a bit weird because he's still kind of a kid, but at the same time, it's not exactly like he's 12. But there's a psychological avenue to explore there with Bruce still doing that, but it's still kind of unlikely. I don't know. I've talked about this quite a lot before, but I do, yes, indeed think that this probably means Robin is a lot more out of the question for part 2. I wouldn't say like outright out the question, because there's people saying, well, what if they do kind of do a Dick Grayson tease and stuff like that? Like, it doesn't have to be fully leaned into, or I don't know. Maybe it's headcanon for something that can be explored one day. Maybe that's copium, but overall, like, in the ways that I think people would expect a Robin to be done, I don't know if that's going to happen. It is more doubtful for me. Up next from Broken Bricks 25, do you think that we'll get another Batmobile chase scene? I love that cast so much. Also, if Harvey Dent does show up to replace Gil Colson, would you want him to be an old friend of Bruce's or not? Like in The Dark Knight. Keep up the awesome videos, my goat. Thank you. Do I think there'll be another Batmobile chase scene? Absolutely. I don't know how they resist doing that after part 1. I think if anything, they up it even more. I think it would be pretty sick though to do a Bat Cycle kind of chase, because sure, we saw like Bruce ride the Bat Cycle at the beginning of the movie and at the end, or like maybe when he was tailing Selina, but imagine a high-speed chase on a bike. That would be pretty damn... Now, don't get me wrong. I also want the Batmobile in there. I kind of want expanded gadgets. This is the way I've always explained it. I think Matt Reeves will go through the approach when it comes to upgrades of James Bond. Like, maybe the suit still largely looks the same, but there's new things that are added on. I think the Batmobile will look largely the same, but have some new fancy toys. So stuff like that. So yeah, absolutely. Another Batmobile chase scene. And I think they'll go even crazier, by the way, because they actually achieved that under the confines of COVID. And that's like so cool to me, because they were meant to do even more. So you can imagine in part 2, without those limitations in place, how much more they could strive towards. But I would like to see, like, let me know if you would like to see Bruce Batman going like over 100 miles per hour on like the Bat Cycle. Like that would be pretty nuts. And then like imagine if he launched off it and like, I don't know, like that had some kind of gliding capability that didn't require him zipping up. Now, as for Harvey Dent, would I like him to be a old friend of Bruce's or not? I think I'm quite impartial to this. Obviously, if he's not an old friend of Bruce's, I don't think that changes much in terms of what I've talked about before with Harvey and what role he could play in the movie. And no, that means no Two-Face until later on, and a potential Harvey Dent spin-off. You've maybe heard me talk about that before. If you haven't, please check out the video I did not so long ago, because I really loved exploring those ideas to the point of where I genuinely feel like they are actually probably thinking about similar things. And I'm really not trying to say that in a cocky way. I'm just like, how do you not kind of go this direction? But there is a cool aspect to, like, we've always seen so far this recluse Bruce Wayne, played by Robert Pattinson, like, only coming out really to the mayor's funeral at the cathedral publicly. Other than that, this guy, like, nobody sees him. So it's like, does he have any friends? Like, no. But did he have friends when he was a boy, when his parents died? Did they kind of get cut off after his parents died and, like, people didn't really see him anymore? Like, but Harvey maybe once knew Bruce through, I don't know, maybe a private school or something like that. I don't know, but I feel like there's kind of cool things that they could do with that, with the natural, very obvious continuation of Bruce Wayne being explored in part 2. It would be pretty cool if there is a new DA, and maybe Bella Real obviously bringing out Bruce Wayne a bit more, because she said she was going to try and follow up with him about the whole philanthropy thing. It'd be pretty mad. It's like, Bruce, a line like, Bruce, my God, it must have been like 20 years since I last saw you, because, you know, he may have known Bruce when he was 8, 9, 10 years old when his parents died. And now just seeing him, and like that would be pretty cool. Like, it wouldn't be massively significant, but having that familiarity and maybe a close friendship when they were very young children, and then he just hasn't really seen him since, would be a kind of a nice touch. And I guess I would love to know your thoughts on that, but I still feel kind of impartial. Now, Oppenheimer6321 says, I don't think there will be another season of The Penguin, to be honest. Don't think we're getting any other spin-offs in this universe. Don't say that. Don't say it. Now, obviously, nothing is guaranteed. I think they will definitely make it if they find something strong enough. I really do think they mean that. And I think Warner Brothers, HBO would absolutely be like, yes, because that, you know, whether it's for better or for worse, they made money. They won awards. If you have people involved who want to do it and they've got Colin Farrell on board, like, they will be like, yes, do it. That's just how it works. Sometimes sequels and things, again, for better or for worse, are greenlit anyway. So I think they will absolutely do it. But will we get it? Still, yes, remains to be seen. As for other spin-offs, I still wouldn't rule that out. I still think there's merit in exploring it. I do think that you can do a Penguin Season 2, but as I explore in my other video, I wouldn't be surprised if we are getting DA Harvey Dent after the events of the second movie, where he doesn't become Two-Face, and you still explore something that bridges the gap between Part 2 and Part 3, if we're going to get a Part 3. Even if we don't, they could still do this. You could have a Harvey Dent spin-off, where he kind of goes downhill slowly but surely, and you have Oz, for what would have been a Penguin Season 2, be the antagonist of the Harvey Dent show. And this all leans into how, obviously, Oz is being subpoenaed. There's an anti-corruption commission. Harvey Dent would naturally be a part of this and very aligned with Bella Real. And it would really line up to the forgery of villains in this universe, where, as Matt Reeves said, they're all in their infancy. This is why Joker is called the Unseen Arkham Prisoner. It hasn't actually been called Joker yet. The Riddler's only just been called the Riddler. Oz has only just become the Penguin, the Kingpin of Gotham, after his own 8-hour television show. Harvey Dent will only just be the DA. We see him a bit in Part 2 in a nice supporting role, but he's heavily leaned on in maybe in 8 hours of television, showing the continuing kind of turmoil in Gotham that is being further exacerbated by the Penguin, obviously, but combated by the new DA. But unfortunately, there's still a tragedy that takes place in where Harvey just snaps and becomes Big Bad Harv. And there is one more comment here. I'm glad you guys are seeing the vision. And let me know, like, if you've never heard of this before, what you think of this. But Matt Morse, 4524, saying, Dent being the antagonist to Oz, trying to get in with the institutions and keep them corrupt could be so interesting. Harvey Dent slowly getting closer to crossing the moral lines and bending the rules to stop him, battling with his Big Bad Harv persona to go about it the right way, with Oz setting him up in the incident that ultimately makes him Two-Face, especially if he actually decides to do the right thing, but have that be what makes him vulnerable for the attack that gives him his famous disfigurement. This is what I mean. Like, Matt Reeves, you have to hear this. Lauren LaFranc, you have to hear this. You have to, if you haven't already thought of it yourself. I need it. I need this. I need it. Just all you need to do is get another casting, like the equivalent of Colin Farrell to the Penguin, but for Harvey Dent. Again, we pepper him in Part 2. Nothing too much. Just keep him Harvey. Keep him good old Harv. But then you bring back that actor and you do like a Mark II Colin Farrell where everyone loved him. Sure, some people doubted a Penguin series, but like we've learned the lesson there. Like the whole who asked for this thing, I don't want to hear that. And hopefully the Harvey Dent series, if that ever comes to be a thing, will have people like, oh my god, I don't know why I ever said who asked for that, because that show was awesome. Just like what they said about the Penguin. So up next from Jazzy Jeff Real Talk. Things I need to see in the Batman 2. Number 1. More Batman fights. We all agree with that. I don't think it's like make or break. I know there are people out there who find movies like The Batman and the way Matt Reeves tackles a slower burn boring and stuff, each to their own. I appreciate both sides of it because I get it. Some people do want a bit more action earnestly. That's me as well. Like, so I love the pacing of The Batman, But I've always said, imagine just like another train station fight scene at the beginning of the movie equivalent at some other point of the movie, like not including the one at the end in the rafters, you know, with the Riddler goons. Imagine one more. Like, sure, we had the Iceberg Lounge, but another one in there would have just been so good, really good. But again, there's a lot to consider when making a movie, because I'm sure, as well as we already know, there were scenes cut out the Batman. The movie could have easily have been over 3 hours, and that's with no additional fight scenes, because they had like GCPD scenes, they had the financial accountants for Wayne Enterprises cut out, like there was things like that. Anyway, more Batman fights. If Matt Reeves could just kind of put that in there, that would be, oh man, just like just the way they do it is so cool in the Batman. You feel every kind of punch, and it's just need more of that. Upgraded glider and suit. This is something I go left and right with, because it's kind of like Matt Reeves really does kind of lean on the realistic side of it, which is why, okay, are we gonna make Batman fly? Okay, is that realistic? Not really. Oh, but there is kind of a way. Wingsuits, literally. So if his cape can actually zip up into that, you can kind of do that. Like, it is very risky, don't get me wrong, which is why they kind of had him, you know, basically almost die. But to kind of like go from that into an even more upgraded one, I've tried looking into this, and it's just the physics of gliders. Yeah, well, I mean, technically you could glide and make it look like a bat cape, like in some of the old-fashioned kind of Batman tales, right? Where he actually had, you know, he could install like separate gliders and, you know, buildings and stuff. But you would still need to like land safely. And I know you have Nolan's trilogy where and this is where I will admit, I think Matt Reeves walks the line of what is realistic in today's technology and not, and he might include things like that. So for example, the contact lenses. We've talked about this before, but you can't really get contact lenses that actually have a camera in it that records such high quality video, and it's as thin as a normal contact lens. Like, you could argue with me, okay, maybe there's some behind the scenes government non-commercial program that they're doing, but again, we're talking like, you know, I know like cameras in our phones are that big, and sure, they have technology behind the scenes that make it thinner, but really in a contact lens? So I do think, yeah, that is encouraging that Matt Reeves may explore technological options that aren't necessarily super realistic today. I've always said cryogenic freezing is one with Mr. Freeze. If he kind of did a bit more of a grounded Mr. Freeze, yes, we, in theory, can freeze people, but we can't bring them back right now the way you've seen it in movies and books and stuff. But technically, that would be achievable one day, probably. So could Matt Reeves do that now? Yeah, I would believe that he would stretch that. So when it comes to a glider, like Nolan's, where it was quite realistic in a way, that was Nolan's kind of angle. But obviously, the kind of things we saw Bale's Batman do with a glider wasn't so realistic. So could he kind of upgrade the glider? I know I've been going on about this glider thing for a while. This is what I wrestle with. I think he very deliberately went with the wingsuit. So would he really abandon that to be like, okay, so now as he's landing, he doesn't need a parachute. It just kind of all of a sudden like becomes very hard, and it just stops him like in his tracks. Maybe I will shut up about that one. I would love to know your thoughts about it. I know a lot of you would be like, well, yeah, you could do that, but you really have to think about what Matt Reeves was going for and what he will maybe go for based off of the limitations he really gave Pattinson's Batman. But yes, he is early on in his career, and who knows, you know, again, this is why I mentioned the contact lenses. If he's got the contact lenses, imagine like throwing another thing like that, but towards other aspects of his suit. So you could go from wingsuit to more glider. So training montage scenes, absolutely. I think I've said for years now, I would love to see Alfred and Bruce spar. That would be amazing. And also, even if you just had Bruce just kind of like, you know, what we saw with Ben Affleck's Batman, like that kind of workout scene, just showing like, okay, but don't forget, he's not a superhero metahuman. He needs to do this. On top of everything else he does, barely any sleep, he needs to do this. So that would be pretty cool. Gadgets added onto the Batmobile. We've already talked about that one, but obviously I would like to see batarangs. I would understand it if Matt Reeves went for something that was more propelled out of something like, you know, like a grapple hook launcher, but batarangs. So it's like precision that way rather than thrown. I know I know that's not really the usual thing because he normally throws it, and that's the cool thing about Batman. You know, the more you practice, like in real life, you can do that stuff. I'm not saying you shouldn't do that. I've looking at the concept art book where he had that apparatus in the Batcave, which is launching batarangs. I thought that would be pretty cool if he could put that onto his suit as well. Now, more Bruce Wayne in public, that's a guarantee. And then number 6, Batman actually fights the main villain. I have said also, all while obviously I'm pretty confident I'm going to be happy with whatever Matt Reeves goes with, that I would like, don't get me wrong, the second movie's villain to be just as psychologically challenging to Bruce Wayne as the Riddler was. Because that is a very formidable thing to deal with. Like, if you're being dismantled, like psychologically as well as in other ways, that is a very compelling thing to deal with for Batman and just any main character, I think. But if you kind of changed it up, like, sure, we had physical aspects to the Riddler with, him going against Riddler goons at the end and stuff. But if you did do a villain where you actually had the whole dilemma, whether it be morally or psychologically, but you actually exchange some blows of them, and let's just say a grounded Mr. Freeze then ran away and escaped, that'd be pretty cool. But I don't know. I do think with the fact we know that the epic crime saga movies, just like with part 2, and well, just like with part 1, with part 2, it's still going to be another detective story, another mystery. So I would still be prepared for not as many fight scenes as you would want. Maybe there will be more fight scenes in the way we would want more, as I said, like another train station one at least. But will those blows be exchanged with the main villain? I don't know about that. I really don't know. Because let's just say it's Hugo Strange. I feel like that would be a psychological dismantling of Batman. Like, it would heavily apply to Bruce Wayne as well, the Bruce Wayne part of the movie. But I don't see him actually tackling like Batman in the suit, if that makes sense. So I'm just getting ready for stuff like that. The same thing with Scarecrow, by the way. Like, sure, like fear toxin could absolutely incapacitate Batman. But I don't see a Scarecrow iteration in the epic crime saga still managing to defend himself again. I mean, again, maybe if he's drugged, maybe. But do you see what I mean? I still feel like it's more likely that it could be more similar along the lines of the first movie, even if it's with a new villain. I do like the idea that we've kind of explored before. Like, what if you have someone like Hugo Strange and Hush? Like, what if, again, expect the unexpected. Never think the adaptations from the comics or the influences that are going to be used for part 2 are going to be copy and pasted. Because in the first movie, you had Carmine Falcone, you had Penguin, as well as Catwoman, as well as the main propped up Rogues Gallery villain, the Riddler. A few of those roles are now going to be missing or less screen time in the movie. So we need to fulfill those roles. So you could have a Hush kind of thing going on while you have the main propped up villain of Hugo Strange, or insert your Rogues Gallery villain for part 2 here. So that could provide a more psychological element as well as a physical one. We're gonna have to wait and see, but yeah, I just wouldn't rely on the Batman actually fights the main villain, but maybe if it comes to a Hush thing, I could imagine that final confrontation, kind of like when Bruce was punching the bitter nobody, even though it wasn't Riddler because he was already in Arkham at that point. I could imagine that could be a physical confrontation where, whether it's Hugo, whether it's Hush, Bruce is punching the living crap out of him, and that villain's just getting by through all of these environmental things that are tackling Batman, like whether they cut the lights off, whether they have their own goons again, and Bruce just keeps persisting but eventually gets hands on with the villain. But I still don't think anyone in the epic crime saga, unless you're like Mr. Freeze, or I guess there are other villains that they could do, but I just kind of doubt for now that they're going to really hold their own with Batman. Now up next, this one's quite interesting because Oppenheimer6321 says, an interesting detail that people haven't noticed, but everything involving the Elliot family is taken directly from a comic book called Gates of Gotham. The name Edward Elliot in that comic is a distant ancestor from Thomas Elliot, who comes from a family of newspapermen. Interestingly, in the film, Edward Elliot is a journalist, and the Elliot Bridge is very important in that comic. And we know from the Penguin that there's one in this universe too. Obviously, there was a blatantly obvious Hush Easter egg in this movie. Sure, technically, we hadn't had it confirmed that Edward Elliot has a son, Thomas, but it's kind of very believable. But like, with all of that being said and done, It's like, why didn't they call him Roger Elliot? That's Tommy Elliott's father's name. Now, sure, again, as I always preach here, adaptations don't copy and paste, but it was still a mystery. But now, yes, if you dive into the comics, Edward Elliot is like the great grandfather of Thomas Elliot, who, along with some of the other founding families of Gotham, Theodore Cobblepot and Alan Wayne, went about constructing the 3 great bridges of Gotham City. Now, clearly, in the Batman epic crime saga, Edward Elliot, the reporter that was trying to expose the whole the Arkham's cover-up and all of that from the murder-suicide thing, he clearly wasn't a founding member of Gotham himself, but he had the name, and he still technically does. Like, he could still actually be from that lineage of one of the founding families of Gotham. Like, technically right now, like Riddler in that video said, the founding families, the Arkhams and the Waynes, but technically, you know, there could be the Elliots as well in this universe. This was always interesting because clearly, you know, Matt Reeves, as we know, does his like in-depth research, reads a bunch of comic books for Batman. He's talked about this. He watches a bunch of other movies out there to kind of help inspire him for the way he might structure his movie. So he would have, you know, it's almost certain that he would have looked at the gates of Gotham and been like, okay, like in my iteration, if I ever were to do a Hush thing, I'm not going to call him Roger Elliot. I'm going to take inspiration from the Edward Elliot name. Now, how is this like a relevant thing to what could be explored in the future? Well, I think these are all obscure pieces of the puzzle, if that makes sense. And, you know, what I appreciate about this when you know, because it led me to do the further research here is like, okay, you should never be like, oh, I found the answer to what Matt Reeves is going to do. Like, no, he could just take influence from this. And it's like, okay, what could happen here if we were to entertain how he could actually put this into a plot if he was to do a Tommy Elliot? Well, this makes me curious in all kinds of ways, such as, you know, even if you combined it with some theories that I've mentioned before and you guys are probably familiar with now, such as, you know, the theories of Bruce in part 2, looking into the history of Gotham more and his introductory avenue to doing that in the first place is looking more into the Arkhams after what he learned from the Riddler. As Matt Reeves said, there's seeds in the first movie that basically are the plot for part 2. We know it delves deeper, these are literal quotes, into the corruption of Gotham. We know that it pertains to Bruce's past. Like, you know, when you keep adding all of this into it, it's like, okay. And what do we know? The Arkhams are also founding members of Gotham. So then I kind of want to go to that part of my theory where I'm like, you know, we had Edward Elliot in the movie trying to uncover and expose what the Arkhams covered up. And this subsequently led to Martha being put away into Gotham Asylum because of what she struggled with probably a really messed up family history. But, you know, like, what if she actually knew the truth? And the truth being, what if it wasn't a murder-suicide? What if the Arkhams were murdered? And it was made to look that way. And Edward Elliot kind of had it wrong. And I don't know, like, again, without me spieling down that rabbit hole for forever, there could be this kind of thing explored in part 2. The history of corruption in Gotham, my God, probably, yes, goes back to the founding families. And if Matt Reeves wanted to kind of, again, like we take inspiration from the gates of Gotham, how Edward Elliot's name was used instead of Roger Elliot, if Hush does actually emerge in some way, shape, or form, but like it's a whole new kind of thing, while still exploring corruption as like a baseline of the movies. That could definitely, you know, create something fairly interesting and very personal to Bruce as well, because it still involves his past and his family's past. It would be pretty mental if, like, it did turn out that Edward Elliot, his family, did have ties to the creation of Gotham that isn't really recognized too much in the Batman epic crimes, like the present day scenes. Like, what if we got more context about why he was trying to expose that? Yeah, sure, he's a reporter. Sure, he would want to expose something like that as a reporter, but what if he was a reporter who was so self-motivated to breaking his own story one day about his own family history that was, like, you know, completely slashed aside by the Arkhams and the Waynes or whatever. And he wanted to expose that through also dropping in the Arkhams and the murder-suicide thing, or like whatever cover-up thing happened there with my theory, but then he got killed for it. And now you have the son of Edward Elliot Tommy Elliot wanting to seek vengeance in a similar kind of way to what happens in the Gates of Gotham series, like with a completely different character, by the way. But this is what I mean by influence. And that's how you can do an iteration of Hush where like Bruce has like no idea about any of this. Again, like it was news to him about the Arkham's thing in the first movie. We know we're getting more into Bruce Wayne in the second film. And like now he's just like inducted into this whole like almost family warfare thing that goes back to the founding of Gotham and is entwined in this almost like family vendetta that was being explored by Edward Elliot in an honest way, but maybe his son Tommy is taking it to more of a personal revenge side of things. And again, I think Bruce will be slapped sideways, like kind of flabbergasted with like, oh, I had no idea about any of this. But again, he learns more and more and more and more and more and more throughout the movie, which is why it's both a battle on two fronts of Batman and Bruce Wayne. So I know that's leaning a lot into Hush for part 2, and like, what if it isn't Hush at all? But there is a lot of organic things that, you know, I can see Matt Reeves exploring there, even if I don't have it all completely 100% correct. There's something absolutely that can be done, and I'd love to know your thoughts on that. So up next from Brian T. Zekiek, 8925. Boba, thoughts on Michael Sorensen as a cinematographer for the Batman Part 2 has worked with Reeves in the past. So as for the cinematographer, man, I think he's good. Obviously the Apes movies, and I see this whole conversation, right? And this is like the danger of talking about this in a discussion series when we're waiting for news, because this kind of stuff could come out any day now. But I just don't know. Like, I really don't know, other than the confidence I have in Matt Reeves for making sure he picks one that would be really, really sweet for him. Like, I see names all the time, like Rob Hardy. You know, he does Mission Impossible Fallout. He actually did Supergirl, and he's done Clayface. But, you know, I don't know about for the Batman Part 2. And then there's like Roger Deakins. His framing is just so much more attuned to what Greg Fraser has done with the first Batman, the Dune movies, with just what we've seen with Deakins movies like Blade Runner 2049, 1917, Prisoners. The list goes on. Like, no wonder there's such an outcry for like Roger Deakins to take over from Greg Fraser. But you know, the reason why I want to entertain just all kinds of cinematographers here is because I get asked about this all the time. Like, Roger Deakins. But the thing about Deakins is he's 76 years old. And all while he isn't retired, he is working less and more selective on who he works with. But I do hold a grain of hope for like some kind of killer headline being something like Matt Reeves pulls Roger Deakins as the Batman 2 cinematographer, because Matt Reeves, if you didn't know already, went on his podcast that Deakins runs with his wife, and he completely complimented the movie, saying literally, I'm really glad you did Batman, because I've never been a fan of Batman until your film. And I've seen it probably 3 or 4 times now, and I think it's very moving. I mean, I love it. I connect with the characters, I connect with what you're saying with it, which is what I want from a movie, you know, and it's great. From Deakins going from not really being a fan of Batman to then just loving Matt Reeves' Batman so much that he watched it 3 or 4 times, that speaks volumes of his appreciation for, like, you know, if this guy isn't taking much work right now and Matt Reeves reaches out and you know, we start thinking about this, not that I know Roger Deakins, but it's kind of like, okay, we know he's kind of not proper retired, semi-retired, and he's selective, but Deakins might be like, you know what? Feck it. I'll do it. I really don't want anyone to get attached to that because, you know, what if he just doesn't? What if he's got other things he's doing? What if he's got, like, whatever going on in his life? Again, the guy is mid-70s, and I'm not saying he's not fit for his age or anything like that. I'm just saying don't rely on it. But that really makes me think, damn, I wouldn't be surprised if Matt Reeves at least inquired to see, A, if he'd be interested, but there's other things you need to take into account, like availability and stuff. And again, of course, there are plenty of other people who do brilliant work, whether that's like Darius Khondji and his vibes from Seven, which, you know, do I need to say more? And then there's Emmanuel Lubezki, there's Lawrence Sher, who would be a pretty good fit. Like, we've seen the great cinematography from the Joker movies, which, you know, that looked great, like a really gritty grungy shots of Gotham that I think, you know, and also you have a framing that of work that you would want to still stay true to with the first movie as this new cinematographer for the second movie. You would want to add your own flair, obviously, but, you know, you don't want to make it look like a completely different movie. So honestly, guys, there's too many to mention, to be honest. I know people, again, latch on to, oh, but Roger Deakins. But like my overall bottom line take on this is that there are plenty of talented people out there that we can just guarantee that Matt Reeves has been probably kept up at night on researching who it should be, like who he could reach out to, and then there's like a backup person he could reach out to if that person isn't available, or another backup person after that person. Like, you know he's not going to take this lightly. So whoever he picks, like, I'm pretty damn confident, because he wouldn't pick somebody who just wouldn't be confident in doing a good job. But let me know, who would be your dream cinematographer? But with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to end this Batman 2 discussion series video here. I've rambled for, I think, long enough for you guys to chew on lots of conversations, so I'm looking forward to this conversation continuing down in the comments below. I love reading your comments, I love interacting with them, I love just, again, it's like the synergy, like we keep expanding and keeping the hype train going for the Batman Part 2 when there's not much else out there, unless the blessing and curse has happened and more news has come out while I've published this video. But other than that, ladies and gentlemen, if you're still watching, consider subscribing for more videos like this. Please consider also liking the video, hyping the video, sharing the video, just to kind of help catapult this out there even more into the algorithm. But until next time, I'm going to love you and leave you, so just thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you fellow Bat family in the next video. Goodbye.